The panelists have asked me to briefly introduce them only, but you have, well, you can find much more about them anywhere you want on the internet. So let me briefly introduce our three amazing panelists. They bring different and complementary views to this topic, which I think will be really helpful. And we're going to try to make this a scintillating panel for all of you with a lot of give and take. So Erika Wagner, I first met Erika when she was working at Blue, where she did for a long time. And now she is working in biz dev at the Exploration Company, a venture-backed startup in space. Preston Dunlap brings the national security angle to us as CTO of the Space Force. Preston now leads Arkenstone Capital and Ventures, investing in space companies. And then we have Raphael Roettgen, who is an investor in space, founder of E2MC, making serious investments in space and also trying to create ecosystems in the space system, including here in Boston. Great to have all three of you here. Welcome our panelists, please, everybody. All right. So like I said, we're going to make this a high-energy panel, which sounds like an oxymoron, but it's not going to be. So I've asked each of our panelists to start with a hot take, a 30-second hot take on space funding to get the conversation going. So Erika, I'll start with you.
All right, so I guess my hot take is living in the commercial space world, we've been hearing for a couple of decades now about the wonders of other transactional authorities and Space Act agreements and firm fixed price contracting as the way that we're going to fix the problems of space being very expensive. And I don't think that they actually fix it. And I don't think that they belong in all the places they're being applied right now. I think firm fixed price contracts are really good for mature technologies and mature markets, and we're trying to apply them to places where they're not. So happy to talk more about that.
That is a hot take, right, in the room? Okay, thank you, Erika. That sounds good. Preston, you're next.
Yeah, well, great to be here. I think maybe the contrarian sort of viewpoint is that, and this may be odd now that I'm on the outside doing venture and private equity investing, but interesting transition from 2001 to today, where we have 2001 sort of the peak of about $18 billion of private capital going into space. Last year, about $6 billion. So that's a lower number, in case any math is out there. Meanwhile, global government funding has gone from $95 billion roughly and up to $135 billion last year. And so we've got a little bit of a nexus where there's a lot of interest and pulse, like I am, on commercial space applications, and yet the government or global governments do tend to be reliable and increasingly reliable in this, despite sort of various wins that are out there. And so I think interesting partnerships and opportunities are available to mix and match private and government, but I would not write out civil and national security government in the mix.
Thanks, Preston. We're going to come back to that. I'm sure any of you thinking of startups in the room, that's like a super important point. I often get asked, are we privatizing space? I'm like, that's just the wrong way to think about it, right? Government's role is huge. Okay, Raphael, yours.
I was actually going to make broadly the same point. In many ways, it feels like space is still, I'm going to exaggerate a little bit, space still sometimes feels like a government welfare program with rockets, like not a commercial business, I mean, with some notable exceptions. Many startups, it feels like they're chasing grants more than chasing customers. And then a broader point, which hopefully you can get back to, I'm talking as a former investment banker, and I feel the whole space funding is completely not optimized and to some extent just really not professional yet.
That's great. We'll talk about innovation and funding mechanisms later. And I'm thinking of one of the questions at the end of the previous panel, right, which is, where are we going to actually build these businesses that can drive forward even space for sustainability? And so the funding of real commercial businesses in space is critical to talk more about. All right, so into the meat of things. Erika, I was going to ask you, you were at Blue for many years. Blue's relationship to funding has always been an unusual one, given its founder. And in particular, its relationship to public funding has evolved quite a bit over time, if you think about the model that Blue has pursued. And I know you were there for all those years. You probably can't speak exactly to your Blue experience from the inside, but I'm sure you learned a lot about space funding that maybe you can share some of those insights with folks.
Yeah, so I think Blue in many ways mirrors many other trajectories in the funding sector. It looks a little different with the name that you put on the first stage, right? So if we think of this as a rocket, our first stage was always catalyzed by a single founder and investor. That's not dissimilar from other forms of capital that come in to get things started. And we often see that that's the federal government coming in with those early non-dilutive funding rounds. But what patient capital allowed Blue to do early on, and I'll talk about the sort of double-edged sword. It allowed Blue to be very focused on the things it wanted to focus on most. It did not create necessarily a scrappy culture of efficiency that was going to push to be very driven by the customer's needs and very tight funding constraints. So you've got that duality, and I think that we are well suited to look at where do we need capital to be patient and imaginative about its possibilities, and where do we need capital to be driving us towards increasing efficiencies and increasing readiness for the market. At the end of the day, whether it's Blue Origin or any other company, we're coming in to build businesses, right? And I think that this conference in particular is about how we build sustainable businesses. I'm now at the Exploration Company. We're a venture-backed startup, started in 2021 in Europe, just raised a Series B last year of about $160 million US. The company is growing rapidly, and what we're seeing in Europe is that there's an appetite to move from the traditional slower ways of doing business on the technology side, on the investment side, to more nimble, more agile, more new space-like companies. So Exploration Company is there to do that. My job is to bring that to collaborations with the US to create places for our products here in the States, things that might be domestically built for domestic purposes, but also to be helping to bridge across the ocean as we're thinking about how does European capital come together to work with American capital? How does the European Space Agency come together to work with NASA? It works on both the private and public sides.
How do you both attract the patient capital and stay customer focused? If the patient capital has these big dreams, or just talk about that tension.
I'll talk about it from where I sit now, because as a venture-backed startup, that's important to us, right? That we are thinking about how do we enter markets with minimum viable products. So we do cargo capsules up and down. Our first cargo capsule was built from napkin sketch to hardware in 9 months. It went up on the Ariane 6 inaugural launch last year. It actually is stranded in space. Astronauts were never stranded on the space station, but this is a poor little spacecraft that's stranded. But it gave us the momentum we needed to build the team, to attract the capital, to show that we had the capacity to build our next capsule. So that one is being buttoned up in Munich as we speak. It will be launching this summer out of Vandenberg. 2.5 meter capsule, 1.6 metric tons, 300 kilograms of paying customers inside that are interested in the microgravity research economy, the commercialization of LEO. So that story arc ends with more government funding in the European cargo resupply services to the International Space Station and to the future commercial LEO destinations. We're building a 4-meter capsule that has multiple metric tons up, multiple metric tons down. Because what we need is to close the logistics supply chain. I think when we look at LGO and SDM and some of these other programs going on in the Harvard MIT ecosystem, we understand that the way that business gets done is starts with supply chains, goes through logistics, and then gets to applications.
That's great. Raphael, you mentioned that you feel like there isn't enough sort of, I was thinking to Erika's remark about scrappy, customer-focused models in space. Can you say, I don't know if you want to react to anything that Erika was saying about her experience.
I mean, that's my experience as well. I mean, to this day, the typical scenario is when we meet founders that the majority of founders is coming from a technical space background. Many are from the existing space community. And that's fine for some things. So if you're working on, broadly speaking, upstream business models, you're developing a rocket engine or something. I mean, even then you should understand your customer clearly, right? Where it's really doesn't work anymore is we're now getting to some of these really interesting applications, right? Applications in the sense, for example, downstream Earth observation stuff, where maybe you're doing something for the insurance sector, right? And we literally get these business plans where it's like 2 Aero-Astro graduates, and we're going to serve the insurance sector. It's like, what do you guys know about insurance? And we're like, nothing. That's not good. Like, maybe you should find a co-founder. Or another example of these applications would be the in-space manufacturing, things like for the life sciences, right? Oh, we want to do something for the life sciences. There's many of these companies right now where they don't actually have a scientist on the team. They're like, we're going to serve the life sciences sector. Well, maybe you should get a life sciences person on the team. I think this is going to happen. Look, I'm actually older than I look. I'm old enough to remember when the internet started, and the early internet was all basically computer science nerds. And then after a few years, people from other disciplines understood this was a giant opportunity. and then it changed. This is what needs to happen in space as well. And by the way, I really hope that in this audience, it's not only aero. I mean, I love aeroastro, don't get me wrong. I hope it's not all aeroastro people. I hope there's people here from biomedical engineering, from chemical engineering. You're going to start working at pharma companies, semiconductor companies, and you take the space message there. That's what we need.
So you think the potential is actually there? It's just
yeah.
that we just haven't made the case. We haven't found connected the right dots.
We're so early. I mean, Matt, you know that how active I'm in outreach, right? I was on this stage yesterday, and so was Erika, thank you very much, organizing an event with my dear friend Ariel Agblor, which was called basically the next frontier of biotech. The entire event, the entire afternoon was explaining to the local life sciences community why space is important to them, what can be done there, how it can benefit the life sciences, how it can be done in practice. And the audience was really mostly bio people because we didn't invite any space people. We didn't want them there. And
No offense.
no offense, seriously. I'm doing this to benefit the space sector. Broadly, the audience reaction afterwards, it was like, I'm mind blown. This is amazing. I had no idea. I'm going to take this to my local management, but this is what we need to do. And I think the potential is there. It's huge. We're just early, and we all need to do our part.
That's great. Preston, one group of customers that seems actually pretty convinced about space is national security. And I wonder, I mean, talking to lots of startups, it's wonderful to have that stable source of funding that also wants you to push the technological frontier. Like, that's great. But I was just reading Space Investment Quarterly's latest report, and like the one bright spot is basically the national security demand. Talk to us, maybe, especially those folks who are thinking of starting space companies. Is that a good thing to lean into the national security demand? What are the trade-offs for space companies? How do you advise space companies on that?
No offense, but I've seen a lot of ethics and morals adjust with the funding environment since 2001. A lot of companies very concerned about partnering with governments in general, both civil and national security. There was a lot of hopes and dreams of the commercial marketplace being available to go resource and be customers for space systems, and then sort of reality hits, and you got to do the next funding raise, and who's got the capital to go partner? Well, it turns out a lot of times it's going to be the government or a government, depending on where you're coming from, to go support that. And so I think companies sort of are beginning to appreciate that that's both a good source of, sort of in a more of a pragmatic sense, a good source of resources, but also in a practical sense, the government is for the public good and does provide the infrastructure if we're doing our jobs, sort of me in my old hat, doing our jobs to be able to enable other companies in the private sector to be able to thrive. We don't always do that effectively or well, which is unfortunate, but that is sort of the mission: stability, security, prospering. And so I think I would consider national security in general or civil space as good partners and potential partners. We can be difficult and challenging. I talked to some of you, hearing the frustrating process of the request for proposal and hearing not so great feedback or unhelpful. That's our fault for not being effective, partners for that. But the money is there. It continues to grow. We've got about $55 billion in the U.S. government a year that we spend on space, sort of roughly split between NASA and the U.S. Space Force and other communities. And so this administration, this team, is very focused on trying to get more out of those limited dollars that we have, and are actively looking to partner with commercial private capital like us and innovators, perhaps like some of you, that are going to build companies. So I would say it's a great place to work, good partners, generally speaking, is reliable. And then once you're in the community of national security or civil space, if you want to talk business, the moat is deep and it's sticky. So if you care about growing the business, it's hard to get across the river, so to speak, but when you do, it's good partnerships for companies generally.
Can I ask Raphael and Erika, can I ask you to react just a bit to what Preston was saying? If you were running or if you're in or advising new startups, and they're thinking about sort of, okay, do I step over that line and try to get inside the national security and government contract? Is that complementary to these serving scrappy customers on the private sector side, or is there a trade-off? How do you How do you wrestle with that?
I think it's absolutely collinear, right? So for us, we looked at what we could do with early pre-seed funding. We could go from a sketch on a napkin to a small piece of hardware in 9 months. Our next one, we needed another tranche of funding. We've been almost entirely privately backed by European capital at the exploration company to date. But now as we're looking at scaling up and really serving the market needs that exist, the government capital is where the money is at, right? It's where the needs are at as well. When we look at the commercial markets, space communications has been long commercialized. Earth observation has been on this great trajectory, and data products coming back from the insights from those satellites. Microgravity markets that like Raphael and I were talking about yesterday are still fairly nascent. We've got all the hockey sticks, right? You've seen them all in every business plan competition you've ever seen. We are still in the flat part of the hockey stick. We haven't yet hit the knee in the curve, but we're starting to see that the dynamics of the market are changing. And so I think we build on a stable government market, a stable baseload of government funding and clear articulation of technology needs, while keeping our ears open for those scrappy opportunities to build with nascent customers. So when I look at biotech, I look at the opportunities that are happening on the International Space Station right now. Government is fully subsidizing rides to the ISS for the life sciences industry. As soon as the life sciences industry is making enough money to be buying its own space flights, it should be. We haven't hit that knee in the curve, but as soon as they are, this is where we should be building a custom space station that is directly customized for the protein crystallization or biomanufacturing or synthetic biology or all these other applications we talked about that are going to make real money in the market and be self-sustaining. Governments are really good at catalyzing markets.
Did you want to follow up, or
Yeah, all of that, and maybe starting from the back. So yeah, the government should be a catalyst, absolutely. Especially if you're something where you're talking about in-space manufacturing, right? Because this is infrastructure that's not cheap, right? So what you really want to avoid is a catch-22, where the people who build the stations, right, the private companies, they're only going to be comfortable, and their investors are only going to be comfortable to invest in the space stations if they think there's going to be enough commercial demand over time, right? For the commercial demand, you need like startups and other companies who built these use cases that we talked about yesterday, right? But those companies and their investors will only be comfortable if they think the infrastructure for scaling is going to be there, right? So there's a potential catch-22 or sort of like chicken and egg problem. And this is where the government, I think, should step in at the beginning and be an anchor customer, say like, we're buying like, I don't know, whatever it is, whatever the products are, like X amount of space-produced semiconductors, X amount of space-produced stem cells. That makes absolute sense. And I really hope the government is going to step into this role. By the way, one thing I keep quoting, which many people are not aware. So I actually read the entire presidential platform document of the Republican Party before the election. It's like a 70-page document. There's one paragraph on space. And you might think that this is going to mention the moon or the Mars. The first sentence of that paragraph is something like, the United States will establish a thriving manufacturing industry in low Earth orbit. That I think is very remarkable. And I think this is exactly what we should be doing. Now, one other thing I do want to say with regards to the government, I mean, one thing that companies have to watch out for is what I call a version of the crowding out effect. That companies basically only focus on the government contracts and they never develop any commercial muscle, so to speak. And I see that time and time again, that there's like, the entire sales team is basically like government salespeople.
Yeah.
And there's basically like no commercial sales team. And yeah, not ideal.
Yeah, and can I follow up on, I'm so glad we got to stations and commercial stations and in-space manufacturing. If you don't know, Raphael also runs a great podcast, so please listen to it, Space Business Podcast. And he just launched a new series of episodes on in-space manufacturing, which is really interesting to start listening to. And I guess I wonder, we can use government funding as a catalyst, but you also mentioned at the beginning you thought that the financing of space was still a bit immature. Like, is it just that we haven't found a creative way to get private capital to fund this long-term vision?
How much time do we have?
Yeah.
Okay, let me I'll just say, I'll give you an example and then we can kind of go from there, right? I think, broadly speaking, there's just large pools of capital we just haven't tapped.
Yeah.
Okay? The public equity markets have not been tapped in an ideal way. I mean, we could spend hours just talking about the last SPAC wave. that actually, some people think that the last SPAC wave was horrible and public markets are not for space. That I don't believe that. I think there's a really huge role for the public markets to play. And I can expand on that, again, as a former investment banker. The other pool of capital, which we by and large have not tapped, and which is very relevant for some of the things I'm mentioning in space manufacturing, is large corporate capital. Broadly speaking, no corporates have gotten involved in space with one notable exception, not a company, but a place, Japan. In Japan, virtually every big of the so-called Sogo Shosha, the trading houses, have made multiple space investments. Mitsubishi, Marubeni, Mitsui, Itochu, they've all made multiple space investments. And this is what we need to start, this needs to start happening in other places. And again, we need to go to these corporates and explain, this is why space is relevant for you, this is why you should get involved. And then there's a lot of capital to unlock.
So I think it's just, if I could, I don't know that.
please.
So the, I had a lot of companies sort of reach out over the last few years, recognizing that that hockey stick that's out there, it turns out is a few more years into the future on the commercial business. And it turns out that if you're an investor in the space, you're actually looking to get some kind of return on your capital. And especially now with it being such a difficult fundraising market in general for technology, it's just extra pressure to go do that. So the question is, how do you bridge the two together to be able to create, and you'll see some specializations there, I think, where government's still working on infrastructure or incentivizing and trying to figure out, we did this on the Air Force and Space Force side, where we could particularly invest in companies or technology that we thought could attract private capital. And we were getting about 5 private capital dollars for every $1 that we would put into this kind of, so a pretty good match, at least from our perspective out there, but showing the demand signal to go do that. And I think you can do that 2 ways. One way is like what it is that you're investing in that's attractive to a potential investor to look at returns in the future. The other way is that the government can approach partnering with commercial companies in more of a commercial-like way. So I think DoD, but NASA has done a great job. Nikki's done a fantastic job of this, saying we're going to go write contracts and proposals to incentivize, companies to go build and operate as if they are a commercial-like company. It's brilliant. Like that is work. It's not going to work all the time. Companies are going to fail. Great, right? But you're actually, to use your phrase, like working the muscles, building the muscle memory to know how to operate in a very competitive, both government and commercial type marketplace. And so we need to sort of wade through what's great for government, what's great for commercial, and in the meantime, when government operates, the more we can operate more in a commercial-like fashion with companies, I think the better we're off to do that. Some of the big infrastructure moves, like communications out to space, like maybe like we did with launch, there's probably going to be a government sort of path to be able to get there to create, reduce the costs and price to entry for commercial companies. But long story short, we need both, what the government's good at doing, what commercial is, and 2, government needs to be more commercial-like in its acquisition approach.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, the title of this session, right, is the role of the government versus the private sector, and instead thinking of them as working in concert, not versus, right? The government as one customer among many. And I love this idea that government funding catalyzes ideas that are hopefully commercializable as well, right? You look for the commercial demand signals for the things you fund.
Can I build off that?
I wanted to, yeah, thanks.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that we're seeing, everything old is new again, but this idea of advanced market commitments is also very powerful. This idea that if you are bringing a product to market that is of future value, that someone will say, I will buy that. So whether that is helium-3 from the moon or biofuels being created in space or some of these other pieces of the ecosystem that we know hold value. So how do I use that to drive current rounds of investment? Well, if I can get someone to say, I will buy your product, that helps me to bring in that more patient capital. It helps me to have that scrappy need to deliver. And it helps to show the rest of the marketplace that there is a real demand signal.
To show that longer path. I love that. Can you, the length of the hockey stick, you must be facing that all the time when you talk to potential funders, et cetera, for the exploration company. How do you have that conversation with them?
It depends on the hockey stick. So if we're talking about biology in space or material science in space, especially where there's a clear terrestrial market, I can say, look, here's where the innovation is today. Here's what we believe you can do in microgravity, and here's how much it's going to cost. So this is where our unit economics need to change. We can see that path. For something like hypersonics, we're coming back through the atmosphere hot. We've got an opportunity to do demonstrations of new thermal protection system materials, new avionics subsystems, things that will underpin our national security posture and increasing commercial growth around the hypersonic space. That's a lot harder, right? I can show you where the tech maturation pathway is. I can show you where the risk buy down pathway is. But showing you where the economics crossover is a different story.
Great. Any other conversation about what we've been talking about? Otherwise, I'll turn it over to Q&A for the audience.
I think Erika's point is an interesting example of the hypersonics. So like every what we call down mass company in the US, at least at the moment, is probably really a hypersonics testbed company. But that's not necessarily a bad thing because they're actually, it's basically a subsidy or whatever you want to call it. So they can develop, hopefully they don't do what I described, this crowding out that they never develop the commercial product. Exactly. But if you look at a company like Wagner, right, they have a big hypersonics contract, but they are also kind of, every time they go up, they're taking some protein crystals up for like the drug crystallization processes. Do you mind if I talk about my new accelerator 1 minute as an example? This is an example of a public-private partnership. So some of you may be aware, we just announced with some partners a new space accelerator called Orbital Edge, which is basically targeting companies that can leverage space stations, right now the International Space Station, to do interesting things like microgravity manufacturing. So we're partnered with that with two other investment firms, Syria and Stellar Ventures, but we are also partnered at the core with the ISS National Lab, which is, of course, the government entity managing the US portion of the International Space Station. And so the way this works is we're going to accept up to 6 startups. They're going to get $500,000 of VC equity funding from the 3 investment partners. But they're also, if all goes well, they're also going to get a free sponsored flight. And so I think this is an interesting example of a public-private partnership that's really where our intention is to kind of help kickstart this new market.
Right, to lay the egg, right, to solve the chicken and egg crisis. I mean, you think about commercial stations, that's for sure like a classic chicken and egg. And if you can start to show these business models could work, that's great. Okay, well, I was supposed to leave 25 minutes for Q&A. I left 22, not too bad. So I'm sure there's lots of questions out there from folks who want to start companies or get your companies founded. I see one in the back. Yes, please, get us started.
Hello, good morning. Thanks for such an invigorating, energizing discussion. My name is Sharon Chu, and I work with a lot of space startups and scale-ups in European market these days. But part of the challenge I see is that a lot of the folks, be that in this room, who are thinking about starting companies or who have started companies, start out with having a technology in mind and then moving it to product and then moving it to customer use cases. Whereas traditionally, kind of in the B2B market, we approach it from the different side, right? We're like, what's the customer need? And then we go try to figure out what product we need to build, and then we go find the technology for it. So my question is, be that on the funding side, be that on the sort of space or LEO infrastructure side, or in terms of some of these other required building blocks, what needs to be true in order for that mentality to switch over, where we can actually approach it from the market mechanism first before we go and tackle a technology? Thank you.
Yeah, this is not, I don't think it's unique to space. I would say, broadly speaking, any kind of deep tech company or investor deals with the same kind of setup. And what is successful is when you mix and match together in an effective way. And so if you've got a team that's very much focused on the tech, that can be tremendous if you can mix and match with a counterpart that understands the business side or the customer side. And to Raphael's point, sometimes teams don't come together in a way that expresses each of those opportunities. From Organization Capital and my colleagues in other firms, perspective, we're looking to triangulate all of those together. And typically we're focused on sort of the mid-stage on the investing side as opposed to the napkin stage. But doing the consulting work, start with companies that are doing that as well. And our focus there is like, okay, so just I'm kind of an analyst at heart, so let's just get down to know how viable is the potential technology, how long do we think it's going to be achieved, are there analogs to go compare it to, and then 2, who's going to buy it? And there's so much hand-waving in the who's going to buy it on the commercial side and the government. Oh, some speaker, Preston was on the stage talking about this. Oh, the Space Force is going to blah, blah, blah. But like, what's real? Where's he putting the money? And what I think a lot of companies miss is follow the money. And you have to do that to survive, even though we're on a mission to deploy something great for humanity or space exploration. You still got to be very pragmatic and practical in the business case to go do that. And so it's not a secret science. It's very practical. You gotta have. Sometimes it's the tech that's the differentiator, and sometimes it's the business model that's the differentiator. And you got to have a good sniff test to be able to get a sense of what magic works. And then there's still the law of probabilities on the backside, and sometimes it's the right thing but wrong time, and so on and so forth. But we're raising money in this difficult environment to go invest in these deep tech areas, and so I think it continues to be more difficult, perhaps, and so people will fall away that aren't in it for the long term. But nonetheless, capital's moving in this area.
I'll quickly add, because it reflects a couple of things that were said earlier too. Widening the circle of people who are talking about space and who are thinking about applications for their customers. I mean, I teach this course at HBS on the space economy, and only 10 of the people of the 100 or so in the room are actually in the space sector. And part of my goal is to get them thinking, if I end up in the CPG sector, like, hey, there's all these new capabilities in space. What problems do my customers have? I might bring that tech to. So, and I think the conference yesterday that you guys were talking about is very much along the same lines. So great. Okay, other questions? Yes, please. You've got a mic right there.
Yeah, they gave me this just before you guys stopped talking. Nelson Bondarchuk, Interstellar Mining. Looking at funding models for companies. Like SPAC was a big thing a couple years ago. What happened to that money? Where is it? And are there any funding mechanisms in the U.S.? Because it hasn't disappeared, right? It's gone somewhere. But are there any funding mechanisms in the U.S. similar to in Canada for junior mining? I come from a junior mining space, precious metals, base metals, sometimes rare earths. There's flow-through share programs where there's investors get tax breaks for investing in companies that are most likely going to fail. And so what kind of funding models are there in the U.S., or what kind of funding models do some of the folks on the stage have in mind to help spur some of that? And then a third part about, I heard helium-3. Are there actual markets for those types of things back on Earth right now? Like what are the big markets that you folks see on the horizon for commodities ultimately, like metals and minerals, things like that?
You want to talk about the funding mechanisms you had in mind, Raphael?
Yeah, so I'm not a mining industry expert. So for example, the mechanism you mentioned, I'm not familiar with. What I would say, coming back to my point of involving more corporates, I mean, we have clearly very large mining companies in the world, right? And sometimes people say like, oh, space mining is crazy. This is going to take like 10, 15 years. It's going to cost like $1 billion. It's like, well, the one thing I do know about mining is like developing a new terrestrial mine also takes like 10 years and $1 billion or like a lot of money, right? So actually, I think space mining is not as far-fetched as some other people believe, but I think one key would be to get the terrestrial mining companies interested early on and as partners in this. So you're just on the SPAC, I mean, as an investment banker, just correcting one point. I mean, a lot of that money actually never came, right? Because if you know the mechanics of a SPAC, the shareholders can redeem before the actual merger happens. And so especially the latest SPACs had almost 100% redemption rates. So a lot of the money actually never came through. I'm actually currently optimistic on SPACs, but this is a separate discussion for another time. And sorry, I think there was another question. Oh, helium-3. There's better people to answer that than me. I mean, I'm familiar with Interloon. I'm more familiar with XMC, Extraterrestrial Mining Company. I went to their event in New York on Tuesday night. I mean, what they explained at their event is they see their big markets in fusion, basically, and then quantum computing. Those are, of course, two markets which are in the future. There's clearly a sort of strategic technology, national security, energy resilience angle to that. So maybe Preston has views on that as well. But that's basically the story they would tell.
Yeah, so I guess we have, we got like rare earths, but I don't know, you call it rare space. I don't know rare stellar. What are the things that you'll be able to attract in other locations? Clearly, if you're on a path to go, build some kind of sustainable presence, and you're going to have is just too long of a a road trip to go visit grandma on Mars, right? So you got to be able to build some kind of sustainability, there for the long term. And so there's clearly a number of interesting assets out there to a company. The question is, how expensive is it to be able to access? How long does it take to be able to access them? These are just kind of, at the basic sense, business questions, and we're still on the sort of the early stages of that. On SPAC, so the SPAC craze sort of made a lot of folks be scared of space investing. I'm okay with that because that probably means that they don't actually know what they're doing. But on the other side, it is a little unfortunate. SPAC didn't necessarily mean space is bad. It just meant that was the wrong approach. So if you've got a deeply unprofitable company that needs massive amounts of money, maybe it's not a good idea to go approach that. Technically speaking, I said I was an analyst at heart. Of those space SPACs, only 2 are increased in value since they IPO'd, effectively SPAC'd onto the market. And half of the space-oriented SPACs are 90+% reduced value. So they're like 2% of their value. So yeah, lots of money went away. It's shame, frankly. I think for those those companies and the investors that sort of put their money after that, which is why if that's not the right approach, you asked about what approaches might work, and so that's back to the partnering with both national security, civil space, international space, and then continuing to energize private capital to be very thoughtful about where to invest, and to be very open and direct and clear if you're a company trying to raise capital that your hockey stick isn't in 2 years. Because it may feel good now to get that money but you're going to die in 2 years because you will have misled and investors will not be understanding, and that is bad for other counterparts. It's bad for your company, and so it may not feel like the most expeditious thing in the moment when you're trying to raise money, but clarity will also give you good investment partners that are like-minded in the trajectory, and so it may feel kind of contradictory, but it's the right thing to do and the best approach in my view.
I want to touch on the helium-3 question specifically just for a moment, because Interlune's been doing a great job of publicizing their business thesis, and they've got a lot of videos and white papers and stuff on their LinkedIn page where you can understand exactly how they're putting that together. They're showing prices for helium-3 on the order of $10 to $20 million a kilogram. And when we talk about landing on the moon, today, sort of the going price is about $1 million a kilogram. It's coming down as you go to larger and larger vehicles. That starts to get interesting. I think that one of the things that's not being talked about maybe enough is that market's not infinitely scalable at that price point. There are definite needs in medical imaging, in detection technologies, in quantum for helium-3 in the markets today. You can go sell helium-3 today. So that's great. But as we start to look at markets that need more and more helium-3, their price appetite goes down. So we've got to figure out a path to greater efficiency over time so that we're not just bringing back a kilogram or 10 kilograms, but we get to the point where if we're going to be serving a larger market with larger vehicles, that the economics still holds.
So your last point maybe I forgot to mention. So Ned kindly mentioned I have a podcast. So the latest episode is actually the founder CEO of one of the helium-3 mining companies. So you can check it out for 1 hour.
Yeah, and I'll just emphasize this transparency and like this hard-nosed numbers. Astroforge is going out there trying to do asteroid mining, and I love listening to their CEO because he's like, look, here are my numbers, right? And like you can challenge them if you want, you can push back, I might be wrong, but I'm just gonna give you my exact, what are the unit economics, what is my business case? And then he can get investors who are willing to buy into that based on what he said and hold him accountable. And I think that's a really nice model for actually showing that. Okay, other questions? So many good ones. Yes, right here, please. Yes.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Carolina Elarco. I live in Boston for 30 years, but I've been in biotech for those 30 years. I'm new to the space economy because I'm working with Raphael. I'm advising E2MC on biotech matters. But I'm originally from Peru, and recently a company in Peru approached me because they want to build a spaceport in Peru. And we did some market assessment, and we understand that there is capacity needs and limitations, so building spaceports seemed to be a good idea. Peru has advantages. It's close to the equator and close to the ocean, so the rockets can come in and be launched, and there is a special site that is being designated by the Peruvian government to do this. However, the company needs to raise $500 million to do this. What are the sources of funding that you would recommend? The Peruvian government has actually designated this as a privately funded opportunity. So what are the sources of funding, and what ideas can you give us?
Panelists? Sorry. Any?
There's an entire spaceports association here in the U.S. That has come together to have these conversations, both around funding and regulatory matters. So far, every spaceport I've seen has either been built on state and federal funding or by a billionaire. I've never seen one that has been successfully capitalized in a purely commercial way. I don't know if you guys have seen.
So, okay, I'm going to go back to controversial hot takes where we started the panel. There will be a time, so some of you may know, again, speaking sort of the investment banker, also former hedge fund guy, so I used to invest in this type of stuff. Infrastructure investing, including in airports, is a huge multi-billion-dollar business. Like there's entire companies who basically just buy big commercial airports or stakes in them, and they make very good returns. And because this is infrastructure capital, you kind of can tap in into very large pools of capital. There will be a time, I believe, I don't know when this is going to be true for spaceports as well. But this may take a while. For like the immediate need right now, yeah, it's probably local government, state government, federal government, some angels, some real estate developers who can build things around the spaceport.
Okay, great. Thanks. Next question. Let's see over here, Cedric. Oh, sorry, are the mic's already been handed out? Oh, I'm sorry. You have a mic. I can't see. Please, first with the mic.
Thank you for a great panel, firstly. My question is about European VC markets in the space industry. So it's been sort of a long-standing complaint that European companies struggle to raise large late-stage funding rounds. I've seen various policy attempts to try and tackle that and channel more private funding into the European space market. At the same time, it seems like space VC markets are pretty tightly coupled to what's happening in the market more generally. If you kind of look at the graph of VC funding in space, it looks very similar to just VC funding in general. So to what extent do you think it's sensible to target space VC funding specifically from a policy perspective? Or do you think these are structural issues that are more general, potentially cultural issues, where if you don't address the structural issues overall, you're not really going to change the dial on the space funding side?
You guys want to tackle that?
I guess I'm the European on the panel. And being European, I have a sort of cynical view on that. So, I mean, Europe is actually trying and for a long time to do a lot on that. So in Europe, for example, you have something called the EIF, the European Investment Fund, which is literally the largest seed fund of fund investors into VC funds. And so they also got excited about space, and they have funded several space funds and actually some deep tech funds which also invest in space. So on space funds, there's two in Europe, which are friends of mine, Alpine Space Ventures, which is Buland, ex-SpaceX, and then Expansion. They both got 60 million euros seed checks each from the EIF. If you start a new fund, that's serious money, and there's actually not really any equivalent of that in the US, at least not a one-to-one equivalent. So they're trying to do lots of things, but look, it's not only the first part that's the problem. I mean, how big are European capital, like public markets? Are you going to exit in Europe? Maybe, but compared to the US, I mean, it's a structural problem that's like decades in the making.
So I think, I generally, it's usually, as you point out, kind of go in this direction. So, super smart, creative, European companies recognizing that the greatest TAM market potential is, here in the United States. And so trying to sort through how to go this direction. Now the tariff situation has sort of thrown wrinkles into some of those, but it's still the same I think, trajectory. It's now just working, what are the legal frameworks to be able to structure a business that has a presence in Europe or Asia, in the United States. And so it's good money for lawyers to go help you, sort of structure interesting arrangements there. But at the end of the day, the buyers are the buyers, and where they are and where the capital is where it's at. So sort of structuring that, going forward. I think that's a great point about, funds that are available. There's a lot of debt matching as well in Europe, so you can get good terms on loans. But it's from a space sort of governmental perspective, there's a lot of sort of bureaucratic churn between the various countries as they work together to go sort of co-fund different projects across the sort of the European civil space and national security space. It's just a lot of sand in the gears trying to make that work.
Okay, we have time for at least one more question, maybe two. Who's got the mic? Anyone? Okay, great. Maybe in the front row here. Thanks. Thanks, Gretel.
Thank you. My name is Cedric Pan. I was a student from Professor Weinzeirl's space economy class at HBS a couple years ago, which inspired me deeply to start my own space education venture to democratize space knowledge to the global audience. That's why I'm very intrigued by Raphael's work, not only in the venture capital, but also the podcast, the incubator. So my question for the panelists today, especially Raphael, is that how can we better inform the general public about this new space age and to attract more interdisciplinary talents, money, and all the resources in order to make the industry more vibrant and attractive?
Okay, so I don't want to monopolize this, so I'm going to only say one sentence and then leave it to my colleagues. But again, Matt briefed all of us that we should be edgy, have sparks fly. So I'm just going to say one thing, and if people hate me, I don't care. Katy Perry flying was a good thing.
Edgy. Good hot take. Yeah. You guys want to weigh in at all? How have you tried to spread the word?
No, I think this is spot on. Is that if we want to reach new ears, we have to be talking in ways that reach new ears. So I have had more neighbors, nieces and nephews, random people on the street talk to me about Katy Perry's flight than I have about anything else that Blue Origin has done. So I think that is in the mode of all publicity is good publicity. But it's an interesting question to say, if that flight had been 6 women from India, would we have reached 1 billion different ears, right? If we had had, if we had had 6 women from across nations in Africa, would we have reached a different audience? How do we take that model that clearly drew attention, right, and use it to drive real conversations, more science, more outreach, more cultural touch points that bring new people into the conversation?
All right, applause. Okay, last question. Right in the middle here, maybe. Oh, sorry. Oh, you gave the mic over here. No? Yeah. Okay, sorry. Go ahead. Yep.
Hi, how are you? I'm Danny. I'm a second-year undergrad student in aeroastro here at MIT. You guys were mentioning a lot about how the future of all these companies isn't just aerospace engineers or graduates from aeroastro. So my question was, what skills should I develop, or what classes should I take, or what projects should I look into doing to best prepare me to be a part of this new space economy?
I'll give 3 really short answers and then pass the mic. Any hands-on student club you can join where you can learn the difference between what you're doing on a piece of paper in Unified and what it means to build, that's great. Take a policy class at least once in your time here at MIT. TPP is amazing and gives you a lot of context. And then find a way to start understanding the business context, whether that's going to Matt's class down the road or taking something here. I think that if you understand the constraints on the problems you're trying to solve, you can be a better problem solver.
Yeah, you guys are very fortunate to be here where you've got access to great business schools and great technology hubs. Bringing those together, fantastic. And then I would just say, use your time wisely. So start something now. A small business, a startup. Do an internship at an investment firm like mine or his, something. So you've got to get practical experience. And then there's a whole lifetime to go figure out where the trajectories go from there. But that pragmatic, just start and do something, most people aren't. So advice would be to just try something and go for it, and then you pivot.
Yeah, I don't have much to add to that. I mean, this is an amazing place. Many of the things we talked a lot about space and bio already, but most of deep tech is becoming more and more intertwined with AI at the center, AI, space, biotech, quantum, it's getting intertwined, right? So to some extent, yes, of course you're going to go deeper in some field, but really try to be interdisciplinary as well and try to develop those critical skills like first principles thinking, scientific method. Those things really matter and will help you no matter what.
And I'll just close by saying if you're a technical person, there are a lot of business-minded folks in this area as well who would love to partner with you and bring their skills and help you get up that ramp all the faster as a team, like they said. Great. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you to our panel. Round of applause.